the number of degrees of freedom for a rigid body in d space dimensions. So before we look into the number of degrees of freedom in d space dimension, let us see what degrees of freedom is in a three-dimensional space. Let's say for a three-dimensional space, what is the degrees of freedom? So if you have to look at the question, we have a rigid body which would have many particles associated with it. Let's take the first particle. For the first particle, we would have 3 degrees of freedom. For the second particle, let's say we have placed the first particle here. The second particle, the distance between first and the second particle is fixed. So we would only have 2 degrees of freedom for the second particle. As we have a constraint which basically says that the distance between the first and second particle would be fixed as it's a rigid body. Then we have the third particle. Now, if you have to place a third particle, you would have two constraints. That is, distance between the third particle and second would be fixed. Similarly, distance between third and the first particle would be fixed. Thus, we have 1 degree of freedom for the third particle. Now, if you have to place a fourth particle, you would have three constraints. That would lead to the fourth particle having 0 degrees of freedom. And for the fifth particle, would again have 0 degrees of freedom, and this would continue on as we add more and more particles. So for a three-dimensional space, we have the total degrees of freedom. So the first particle we have 3 degrees of freedom, second particle 2 degrees of freedom, third particle 1 degree of freedom, then 0 plus 0 plus 0 for any particles which we have. So the total would be 6 for a three-dimensional space. Now the question is for a d-dimensional space. If you have to look at this, we can see a pattern. What is this? For a three-dimensional, we have d plus, d minus 1 plus, d minus 2 plus, and so on until zeros, zeros, and zeros. So in this series, we can write in a very simple way. What is it? This is basically a sum, and the sum is basically d into d plus 1 by 2. So this is option number C. The answer to this question is option C.